Hello, welcome back. I am with a filmmaker who is a good friend and a warrior who's like a modern day Indiana Jones and just a good dude and a dad all around. Nick Polizzi, welcome. Welcome to the summit.
Amazing to be here, man. Amazing.
Hey, so it's, I love hanging with my filmmaker buddies because, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes out in making this stuff and capturing these stories. And you spent a lot of time out in the Amazon doing some wonderful work. For those of you who haven't seen a movie called The Sacred Science, you need to see it right now. We'll hook you guys up with links and ways to go find it. But Nick was out there doing it, man, and really following the shamans, trying to figure out where this medicine came from. And we got a lot of stories. We got a lot of war wounds because, I'm out in Africa doing my thing, and he's out, in South America doing his, and you've really brought back something very powerful that I wanted to share with our audience, because not only did you find the medicine and all the goodness that was happening out there and bring back inspirational stories, which is a really awesome feat as a filmmaker, because what you want to do is get people's attention and inspire them. But you've had a series of flood of emails saying, well, how can I do more? How do I go out there? What can I do? And so you've spent, God, I'd say the better part of the last 18 months or so since we've been talking about it, out there trying to figure out how to help people find these herbs, how to help people connect with nature. And there's the good, the bad, and the ugly, and supply chains and all this kind of stuff. So I really want to talk about how people can now start taking the next steps and doing things that are conscionable and good for the planet, good for themselves, and really, just good all around.
Yeah, for sure. I guess starting with sourcing. I mean, just because you're buying something at Whole Foods doesn't mean that it's being made in a way that's benefiting the local population where it's grown, right? I mean, we know that as experts in this stuff, but a lot of people don't. They look at this, the organic label and the fact that they bought it from some health food store, that to mean that it must be A-okay, but we're finding that it's definitely not. So especially with jungle herbs, there are major, not only major pharmaceutical companies, but a lot of herb companies that aren't being very conscious about how they're getting the herbs from these regions. And whether it's whether it's Africa, whether it's Asia, like, you got to be really careful with how you're getting this stuff. So yeah, a lot of the questions that were asked after the film are pertaining to the herbs and to the healing techniques used in the film. So people are like, okay, how do I get down to the jungle? If I want to have this exact same crazy jungle experience, or if I can't get to the jungle, how can I get these herbs? If I can't get these herbs, can I find somebody near me? Are there any local shamans to kind of to go see? And the answer to all those questions is yes, but you have to be really careful and use your head. You're not like in Disney World here. Like you can get really severely injured and turn your health for the worse if you're not careful about what you're taking and how you're sourcing your stuff.
Oh yeah, I remember being down in Peru, and all these tourists were getting so excited about this shaman that was putting people on this San Pedro, which is like a psychedelic brew. And look, I'm not opposed to that stuff because I've seen some of the science on it, and it really is therapeutic in some ways. But when performed with a qualified shaman and not some tourist trap monkey. And so, I was watching this happen, and I saw these guys getting spun out thinking, look, just because this guy is dressed in some indigenous garb doesn't make him an authority, and you're trusting your brain and you're trusting everything with this person. So how do you navigate those waters? Because it seems kind of scary for people going out there not knowing how to curate.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have to do a lot of research, because the research isn't really done yet. We have a new program coming out. I'm not gonna try to pitch it too hard here, but we have a new program coming out called Secrets of the Ancient Healers, which sort of is a starting point for that. And it's a lot. The components of it are interesting because it's exactly where I think people should start. So whether you get this program or you start doing your own research, starting to learn about herbs, period. If you're starting to work with herbs, you shouldn't be taking only your doctor's advice or a medicine man's advice or your aunt's advice. You should be educating yourself. If we're taking back our health, which I think is really at the heart of this movement, is let's take responsibility for our own health. But to do that, you need to start educating yourself. You need to know a little something about herbs. You need to know a little something about energy working. You need to know what to expect and what to be looking out for. So I think that's one of the first things. People say, they want to go out of the jungle, and I ask them, okay, so what do you know about the jungle? What do you know about, these techniques? And if they haven't read any of the many books about shamanism that are already out there, then that's one of the first places to start. So because a lot of people will read about it and start realizing that it goes against their it may go against their really rigid Christian beliefs. You know, oh, I didn't realize that they were going to be doing that, or you know, I didn't realize that some of the plants being used by these cultures are what we would call hallucinogens here in the country, and I'm not interested in doing anything that would break the law. I mean, there's all kinds of barriers to entry that you should know before you even start down this path. And I'm not saying that I'm not trying to deter your audience from doing it, because it's extremely effective, but you got to want to do the deep work, right? You and I always talk about this stuff. We talk about doing the deep work. You have to be willing to kind of go through some trials and tribulations and get to know yourself in order, if you really want to heal from within, which is really where the healing happens. If people aren't willing to do that, they should know before they get involved. You know, and that can happen pretty fast if you just start doing research and watching the plethora of movies that are available on this kind of stuff.
You know, it's funny because I see this happen all the time in the alternative health space, where someone goes and like flops on someone's table and says, "Okay, shamanize me. You know, do the the shaman thing to me, right?" Or even when we're out in Africa and we're walking and tracking these animals and learning how they live and behave and where they sleep and all that, and then the tourist jeep goes blazing by with people just like taking pictures and thinking they're on safari, and I'm like, dude.
Yep. Yeah.
You're not. You're at a zoo. It's just an open air zoo, because you don't have any idea how these animals exist. And so there's so many layers to this. And I'm not necessarily encouraging people to go walk out there with the big game or go out there and do ayahuasca. I think it's pretty clear that both of us have we've taken a few arrows in our back in some of this footage. It's not for the weary, but the lessons that we've learned from our indigenous ancestors and these people that have really held it down for generations. Yeah, man, that's powerful stuff. Herbs heal. Medicine works. This ancient stuff is really powerful.
And it's the for our project, and you probably saw this a lot in Africa too. It's as much about eliminating as it is about adding. The protocol in our film, there's a lot of herbs. The Amazon has 60,000 species of medicinal herbs, 1% of which have been studied, maybe 1.5% of which have been studied for their medicinal value. But that's only one component to what happened in our film. Some of the big things that are more silent, but definitely, there and during the film, are the isolation. You're isolating yourself for 30 days in the middle of nature. It's nature therapy at its complete extreme. Another thing is taking away every bit of external stimuli that can distract you, and sort of keep yourself from facing who you really are. So when people come down to the jungle, we say you don't bring a cell phone, don't bring your laptop, don't bring anything, don't bring your iPad or your iPod, or anything that you can write on or anything that you can read. They still kind of try to sneak things into this little jungle hut, because they just can't imagine what it's going to be like if they have to sit there without being transfixed on something that they can lose themselves in. So when they walked into this jungle healing center, the first thing that happened was their backpacks were emptied out, and everything that they could distract themselves with was taken away. And that was a rude awakening. You're now isolated without anything to distract yourself, so you have to confront who you are. Again, going into yourself, doing the hard work, actually understanding what those negative beliefs and those quote unquote demons that you have within you are doing to you, and how they're interfacing with your perception of reality. So I feel like there's a lot of ways of doing this. It's not just the herbs. The herbs are amazing, but you got to be cleaning the slate first, and that's what, you could say that ayahuasca, is part of that. The idea of, purging every bit of negativity out of you, so that you can start with a clean slate and build your healing protocol from there.
So let's stay on this for a second, because to me, this is huge, and this is a piece that's really missing from modernity, right? Is we live in this culture that we think that something in technology is going to be invented that's going to help, erase my memory of my father being a jerk, or all the things that we're running from, right? And time has become this thing that we run from. It's compressed, and in the modern world, we don't have time for anything. We're just running around like crazy people trying to find solutions that plug up holes that are leaking, instead of going into that holistic, dynamic environment of actual healing that comes from our origins. Like all the guys that you and I have hung out with in these little villages. I mean, A, they have time, B, they take the time, and C, they go in.
Yeah, it's there's a difference between going to a doctor here in the States and, like you said, flopping yourself down on the table and saying, okay, do what you got to do. I just don't want it to hurt, you know?
Hurry up, I got a meeting in 20 minutes.
That's it. That's it. We don't like pain and we don't like boredom, you know, here. And I guess nobody really does, but I think a lot of these indigenous cultures see the role that they look at it differently. They look at it as part of the overall picture, and they're not avoiding pain and avoiding who they are like we are. We're constantly trying to turn our backs on this looming being that is kind of aging as we go, and fearful of all the things that might happen to us, all the things that we might not be able to, you know, I don't know, the way we're presenting ourselves in the world. We kind of carry around this baggage with us here in this country and in the West. Whereas I think that the people in these indigenous communities are much more in touch with who they actually are. And they know that in order to heal themselves, they're going to have to do a little bit of work, and we don't really want to do that here. We live in a culture of convenience. That's the way I look at it. This is a convenience-driven culture where people are too busy to actually want to look at themselves, and they rather have it easy than have it, you know, be truthful and something that's lasting. And I think that that's what you need to sort of start looking at when you walk into these cultures and expect to get any value out of the teachings that they have to offer.
And it's such a weird interface, right? Because you're a dude, you're up in Berkeley, California. You know, I'm in California. I've got an iPhone. You know, we have camera crews. We show up with technology because that's the only way we can share that world with our worlds, right?
Yeah.
And so we interface with them. I'm sure you've put your kid in a car and taken them to the park or the school or something. And so here we are trying to find a balance in life and live life in a way that's in harmony with nature and all these principles. But we live in a world that's buzzing all around us. And that's really the challenge of modern man. It's not like, you know, I can't in good conscience say you all need to move out and build a yurt and live on the side of the Amazon and, you know, go pull fish with your hands. It's just, that's not reality anymore. So how do we bridge these and bring back some of the medicine and bring back some of the lifestyle and the herbs and all these things that, all the goodness of the, you know, natural and ancient world into a way we can live in the modern world without collapsing and without running from ourselves and all that. And this is a question of the hour, obviously, but I'd love to kind of stoke that dialogue with you.
You know, somebody whose work I love, and he's a total brother, and I'm like, you know, anytime I have to hang out with him, it's always a no-brainer. You know, his name is Daniel Vitalis, and you probably have heard of Daniel Vitalis, but he's a wild crafting you know, specialist. He lives up in Maine, and he's totally interested in indigenous nutrition. You know, but something that, in a recent conversation, he was telling me, you know, the thing I'm really understanding now after doing this for a few decades is, you know, it's sort of like chasing our own tail if we are trying to chase these indigenous communities and adopt every practice they have and try to discard anything that we've learned, you know, in our modern world. He's like, we need to become modern indigenous folks where we understand what you know, the technologies that we've developed have to offer us, and we realize the trappings of those, and we discard the trappings and hold on to the benefits, and then we do the same thing with indigenous culture, because we have made advances, right? I think that we, especially in the natural health community, there's this tendency to sort of, you know, look down upon or shame Western medicine and Western, you know, technology, where, you know, I think that everything has a benefit, and I think that we've definitely come a long way, you know, in the last, you know, few hundred years, but we've also left a lot of things behind that were a big part of the healing picture. If we can combine both of those things, it's more like this new modern, you know, this modern native kind of a movement where we're taking the good things from both categories and merging them into something that makes sense in our lives.
Yeah, you know, it seems like a couple decades ago that the tendency was to say, okay, drop out. And a lot of people are like, well, that's not for me. I mean, I got kids and school tuition, and I got to keep my job. Therefore, I'm going to stay normal while you are abnormal. And, you know, that line is now broken, where everyone understands we shouldn't suffocate the planet. Everyone understands that we should probably not poison the soil. And if you don't understand it, then you should start understanding it pretty soon. And we understand that, you know, look, there was some value in plants and plant medicine, and then we could talk about plant spirit medicine later if we want to go off the deep end. But you know, yeah, exactly, and I say we do because this is probably the interview that can go there here. And so, you know, there is that value, but how do you bridge that gap in the modern world and not have to? And so, how do you strike that balance really in the modern world? Because right now we don't have it.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I guess there's so many ways to answer that. I think that we have another tendency we have is to think that the best thing is happening somewhere else. So a lot of people ask us, okay, so how do I get down to the jungle? Let's say, or how do I get to Asia where the shamanism possibly originated? But what I think a lot of people don't realize is that there's a substantial amount of indigenous medicine right here in the States. And honestly, wherever you live, if you tell me where you live, I can tell you it's probably within 20 miles of your house. You can find people who practice healing traditions that are very similar to those that you saw in our film, and probably very similar in nature to those that people saw in your film. Yes, we live in big cities, a lot of us do, but not very far outside of those cities. There's access to full immersion in nature. There's access to indigenous wisdom that's still there, even though we've systematically, as a Western civilization, tried to, not even tried to, just begun marginalizing and exploiting and systematically, exterminating most of the indigenous cultures here. They still exist. They still manage to hold on. So, and they're actually very, very welcoming if you know how to ask the right questions and enter them with respect. So, a lot of these things are right in our backyard. The majority of this country is still woods. It doesn't seem like it is, but it actually still is. So I think the illusion that we've come too far it's exactly that. It's still an illusion. I think that it's almost an excuse for not taking those steps towards health. I think that if you look hard enough, you'll find that it's not very far away from you.
And it's a psychological stance. We've come too far means that you're back on your heels and you can't see clearly the life sprouting all around you. Like I'm standing here, I can look out of windows all around me and there's just trees everywhere. I mean, that's nature, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, do I see those or do I see my busy calendar and not be able to see through that in any given day?
It's totally true. I mean, it's a total mindset. And I guess maybe that also plays into what you're saying is, the Western mindset is really more, I think, is really more of the culprit than the reality of what the actual landscape here looks like. I think that it's the way that we have been sort of trained to judge ourselves based on how much work we do or based on how much status we have. I know that a lot of my friends from college are, definitely more focused on having the large house with the large plot of land, large property and 4-car garage. I mean, that's sort of like the goal for some reason. It's become the goal. Like this American dream has become the goal for everyone, And I think that that comes at the expense of community. And I think that having a tight community in every one of these indigenous cultures that we visit and that you visit, like those communities they're bulletproof. That's how it all works. It takes a village to raise a child, but we don't have villages anymore. It's no wonder that we're seeing some very interesting new problems happening with the youth of this country and the youth of westernized countries. So I think that community is a big deal, and the lifestyle that we live, we're almost sort of brainwashed into isolating ourselves from each other, even from our families. In these indigenous cultures, you see grandmas, great grandmas, that are all a very big part of the family. Here, we ship them down to Florida. You know what I mean? And here, they're not part of the family. We separate ourselves even from our own kin here. And I think that there's something very psychologically damaging about that.
Yeah, and that's marginalizing the generations that hold the wisdom is probably one of the most dangerous marks of where Western society has gone. I mean, that's the fabric of your bloodline, it's the fabric of your community. And so you're a new dad, right? Like you've got a young kid, I've got a young kid, and we talk about this a lot offline is, the pressures of a professional dad who's trying to be a better dad, right? Because a couple generations ago, like dad went off to work and he'd come home and pat you on the head and you go to, and once in a while you'd play ball, whatever. Dad didn't have time for his kids because he was working. And, we're trying to be kind of Renaissance dads and be there for our kids and be loving and support them and do all these types of things while out there, fighting the good fight. And, I live in a pretty safe neighborhood, and still in this neighborhood, there's parents out there watch kids aren't out there in the street unsupervised, because there's always like the creep factor, right? There's some possibility that some creepy person's going to come and do something really nasty, and that's kind of infiltrated its way into our society and our culture, and it's been really detrimental. So, how do we even face that?
I mean, it's fear, right? I mean, and fear, I think, is at the heart of illness. I mean, I think that any of the medicine men that I know would probably pretty much agree with that. They probably you know expand upon it a little bit, but fear is at the heart of where most of our disease comes from, right? And I think that you know, yeah, you strike a chord with the whole thing about you know this new thing with all these pedophiles that are all everywhere, and you need to keep your kids safe and you know keep everything. It's like this clenched up energy. It's like, oh no, please keep. You know, one of the patients in our film, Nicola, who was suffering from Parkinson's disease, she got extremely interesting and profound healing results when she was out in the jungle. And what it came down to, she was working with a medicine man who specialized in neurological disorders. I mean, they don't call them those. He's somebody who's known to be good with that kind of stuff. And what it really came down to was she's been trying to cling to her children. Like she clings, and she went through this terrible divorce, and she's trying to keep her family together. And like that was what came out in one of these crazy vision quests that she came on, and it was a huge breakdown. But then there was the breakthrough, you know, afterwards. But it came down to like this, like clenched up, like trying to keep everything safe and try to keep everything together and try to make sure that reality, you know, the scary world outside doesn't kind of like, you know, pull your life away from you, pull your most valuable things in the world away from you. And I think we're very clenched and clingy and very rigid in this culture, and I think it definitely plays into parenting. You know, I have that tendency. You know, obviously we do, and you see it come up like, wow, that's interesting. This is really interesting to see that I have it in me to become so rigid. I have it in me to become so scared of the unknown. You know.
Yeah, and then you close down, and then it becomes about protecting your own and taking care of your own. And, you know, I'm going to get myself through today. And so, you know, this piece of chewing gum that is now in my way is getting in the way of my day. So I'm fully justified in rolling down my window and chucking it out on the street because it's not my problem, because the big bad world out there is not my problem. And so we've kind of separated ourselves from the planet and all around it.
Completely, and that closed offedness, I guess if that's even a word. I mean, it suffocates you, and it doesn't let in the energies that you need to be letting in order to be a fully healthy human being. One of the medicine men from our film, you know, when he found out that we were going to have a child, he's like, okay, he's like, well, listen, if you think that you know ayahuasca is a strong medicine, you know, if you think that wachuma is like a strong medicine. He's like, you haven't seen anything yet. Parenting is by far children are the most powerful medicine there is on the planet. They can systematically and very innocently expose every weakness that you have and lay it right at your doorstep, and so that you can see it very plainly. You know, and I think that there's something very interesting about that parenting. Is it's like it definitely strips you down, and it shows you where you're weak. You know, and what you need and the stuff you need to work on. And it also gives you and it also fills you with the urgency to get that work done fast, because you don't want it getting in the way of your ability to be a good dad, you know, or be a good mom.
You know, it's interesting because I was just talking to someone who is having the opposite side of that equation, where the husband just cowered at the responsibility and started drinking, and just completely on tilt and is failing, and the mom is, you know, doubling up and trying to be as you know, supportive and strong, and, you know, just doing it all when someone couldn't take the medicine. It was too bitter, and they couldn't face themselves. And it becomes a really, really powerful, life-changing catalyst, and not necessarily for the better for some people. I mean, look, in eternal time, you know, it'll come around. It's a soul lesson, right?
Yeah.
But that poor kid, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to a Buddhist elder talk about parenting. Obviously I'm geeking out on the parenting and the spirituality thing. Sure, you are too. You're trying to find every possible tool and like shortcut to kind of like get better at it that you possibly can. That's what you do.
100%.
You know? And yeah, just speaking about the fact that we don't in the West really take into consideration how smart and how intuitive the children are. So, you know, it isn't that it's not like, you know, we can hide it from them. You know, even if we're doing a good job of like, you know, walking out into the garage and having it out with our spouse, they know everything, they see everything, and they're hurt just as much as we are hurt by the painful, you know, talk that we use, the painful communication we use with our spouses, right? So he just has this perspective of, you know, this adds that urgency. Like, you know, you need to get conscious fast, because your children can be very, very much affected even by subtle violence in your communication methods. And this, you know, and you know, when you have a 2-year-old, you see like they watch and absorb everything. They're learning everything that you do is right. There's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing they can look at as a wrong move. If you're doing it, then it means it's right. So Yeah, it's extremely powerful.
And they emulate. So now let's fast forward or reverse, I guess I would better say, 2 generations, because a lot of us have been emulating people who've been walking around like zombies, right? In the last 2 to 3 generations, society in the West has really gotten unplugged from the earth, and this march towards progress and all these things that have put us in orbit, and all the things we talk about in the movie that are awesome. It took technology to build the Eiffel Tower. It took technology to make my iPhone work. But there was a loss. And as we started emulating the ways of our parents, we also lost things like learning how to cook and learning where food comes from and all that. And that's where I take, the profound responsibility as a parent of going, holy crap, man, this is the most serious game in town. And I need to get this straight for this kid, because this download is going to determine the course of his future and probably the world's future, because this is the future I'm staring at right now.
Yeah, I mean, success. I think so. The baby boomer generation really was attaining the American dream, and the American dream was a very easy little package. It's like, okay, well, if you have 2 cars and you have a little house and you have a job that pays you a certain amount of money a year, and it seems like it was measured by pretty materially and by having some sense of security after like the Great Depression era, right? So having security, having stability for your family was enough. Right, that was enough for it to be for you to think to yourself and probably really be like pretty successful coming from such hard times. Now we have the ability, we have the time and the responsibility to really look at take it to the next level, and start looking at how we can become better to each other as a society, and how we can start to give back to the people that sort of clumsily have been trounced upon by our lifestyle, which tend to be people that live in the places that you and I go to find answers. It's a really interesting, really coincidence or irony that where we go looking for medicine, where we go looking for new healing strategies, tends to be the areas of the world where people are being systematically annihilated by our ignorance. And I think that's, for me, it's like, as like a man, or if you want to look at it that way, I look at it as like the perfect closed circuit. It's a perfect thing. It'll keep me here for the rest of my life, because we're finding things that can help people heal, and we're also giving back to communities that are about to be devastated, or they've been devastated, but they're actually about to be wiped off the face of the planet. So we can be healing ourselves and healing indigenous communities at the same time if we do it right. If we source our stuff the right way, to go back to where we started. If you source your stuff the right way, then you can be and you do it consciously. You can get it from people who are actually very intimately entwined in this network of indigenous communities, and are helping them. Not just giving them money, because if you give, not just saying, hey, here's $1 million, go do with it what you want to do, but figuring out how they can sort of preserve their ways, in a world where there's a lot of predators out there, mostly natural, people who are oil exploration and other natural, what word am I looking for here? Other
resources. They're exploiting resources. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's it's interesting. It almost seems like we're doing a grand experiment in 2 directions. We're going to hyper-urban people and saying, how can we tech down and stress down a little bit and get closer to nature? And then we're going to super rural people who've been marginalized and decimated, saying, okay, how can we introduce some tech and some of the gifts of modernity without ruining what you have? And how do we do so without being ostentatious or patronizing? Because who the hell are we to decide whether or not you should wear Nikes? And so it's a really interesting time.
It is a very interesting time. I mean, when you have these uncontacted tribes in Manu Park in Peru, and the biggest concern with uncontacted civilizations are that they're not going to be immune to our stuff. So that people start going in there. Natural resource companies, particularly oil exploration in the jungle. They get permission from the government to go in and start poking around, and if they make contact, then you have no idea what you might do to an entire population. If one person from our civilization makes contact with people who've never been vaccinated or don't have the generations of biological defense that's been built up over all that time. So you can wipe out an entire population and not even know it. So, I mean, it's interesting, making decisions for people and how fast they should be evolving or what they should be holding important. It's a really good question. I know that in the jungle there's this fear of acculturation, where they're losing their culture, and the culture is being taken over and dominated by a different culture, But that's the story of the human race. I mean, geez, who knows, who knows how many cultures have existed that have been basically taken over and changed and absorbed into a greater one. I mean, what do you do? How do you stop it? That's a good question. I mean, I think there's probably many different answers to that question. For us, it's about being very careful and being almost painfully slow in how fast we build our company. We want to be bringing in herbs, a few herbs next year, but we're not going to be doing it at the expense of a population. We want to do it through people who have been there for a very long time, who have a history of working very well and being very philanthropic with their operations in the jungle. So I think that everybody has to decide. It's like what we were saying before about educating yourself and make your own decisions. It's your responsibility. I think it is. It's our own responsibility to do our own research and make choices that resonate with ourselves. At this point, there is no cut and dry way.
So can you help our listeners understand what fair trade and kind of responsible shopping means for the indigenous people? Because there's so much lingo out there, and people just go, oh yeah, I agree, but they haven't had boots on the ground. They haven't been there amongst the people to see what it does to their cultures when you go into buying from a company that's exploiting these people.
Yeah, I mean, the question I like to ask is this a company that is just based in this location and using the resources, including the human resources that this company that this region of this country has to offer them as a business? Or is there some sort of an arrangement where the people in this particular area have an actual equity stake in this company, or actually have ownership over part of this operation? Because I feel like it's very suspect when it's a company that sets up shop that has a lot of capital. That's going to. I don't want to name any particular companies, but there are many of them. Set up shop, they see an opportunity, they see cheap labor and an ecological situation that seems very like a no-brainer to them from an entrepreneurial perspective, and they just exploit the heck out of people. But then at the same time, they are sort of using organic practices, so they can say organic, and they do have a pretty pure product, so they can say it's pure because it actually is. But there are casualties. There are numerous casualties that occur along the way that if you knew about, you would never even touch the brand. So I think that there's something to be said for creating a system that really gives back, gives shares of very substantial shares of the operation to the communities and the cultures that you're working with, not only for their labor and their land, but also for their knowledge. This knowledge is priceless. And a lot of, one of the interviews that we have in our Secrets of the Ancient Healers program is with an elder from Northern California named Dennis Martinez. And he says, it's nice for you white men to think that we're gone. And it's nice for you to think that we have nothing left to offer because you wouldn't know. Because none of us talk anymore to you. So he's like, the medicines I'm showing you, they're amazing and they're sacred to us. But they're not the powerful ones because we see what happens when we give you things, and you can't control yourselves. You're like children. You can't control yourselves with wisdom. You're going to do whatever you possibly can to get your way, even if it means hurting other people needlessly. So I think that the knowledge itself is where it's really at, and I think that the people that are giving back the most and have good operations are the people who really understand how powerful that knowledge is, and they're the ones who get more of it from these people because they understand now that there is this risk of losing their knowledge and having their knowledge used for selfish means as opposed to what it was originally intended for, which is healing people. Anybody, not just their own tribe, but anybody who needs the healing should have the knowledge, but they're not going to be trounced upon by greedy Westerners anymore.
Well, they've learned their lesson, and imperialism is still alive and kicking, and it's doing what it's been doing. And I've talked to a lot of these people, and it seems like they're like, oh, I'm really interested in chronicling all this stuff. It's more like they're more interested in creating like a green app than actually connecting with the human network of people that have held this down for thousands of years. And so there's something really missing between the internet and the human web. And this web of life that these people can actually feel and are integrated into. And so, it's easy to walk into one of these villages and be like, nah, man, we're really helping them out. They had nothing, and now we brought money. And you know, they didn't really care about your money, but you know, they might have had cholera. And
Yeah.
so that was their problem, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like we just assume that we're going to come in with this currency, and it's what they would want because it's like the hallmark of, you know, civilization. And all they really wanted to do is, you know, make sure that the river stopped flooding because someone was messing something up upstream.
Yeah, completely. I mean, especially when you're talking about cultures that live in, you know, I think it's pretty astounding when you're in these cultures in the jungle and they don't even know what homelessness really means, because you live in the jungle, you live in abundance. If you're homeless, I mean, okay, so you have to walk over to pick a banana, and you're not starving. You know what I mean? And you're not going to be an outcast, because people in those communities don't need to give money to be seen by somebody who can maybe help them heal. You know, it's not looked at that way. It's not. They haven't monetized their little indigenous health systems like we've done here. You know, it's something where I think being homeless is not like this terrible, you know, lot in life. It just means you're lazy. It just means that you're not interested in doing any of the things that your community, you know, tends to do to thrive. You're just sort of a moocher, but you're not. It's not like being in New York City and seeing this population of people that are devastated and are ignored and are, you know, just. I lived there for so long. It's just like, it's one of those emotional things, like, you know, this crazy world we live in. Look at all the casualties, you know, and that's just one of, you know, the homelessness as an example. I mean, look at how we treat people in our country that don't have enough for themselves. They're not welcomed into situations and or embraced by those who do have. They're not, you know, and I think it's just one of those blind spots we have as a country and as a society. Sorry, I got off the point there, but. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of differences, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, if you're walking down the street and you see someone begging, and all of a sudden you look and say, "Oh my God, that's my dad," or "That's my son," all of a sudden it hits close to home. But you know, I don't know who this person is. Move on.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
or here's a buck. Right. But this doesn't solve the fundamental problem that drove you to this situation. It's seldom just money.
Yeah.
Right. It's seldom just money, and they're not part of it. It's funny when you talk about homeless, because if you're in an indigenous culture, I mean, unless you're like, you know, an Eskimo and you broke your igloo or something, home is the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And you fundamentally, within the fabric of your being, understand where food comes from. So you're not going to go hungry if you understand that home provides food.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I knew food within, you know, the first 3 days in our Africa trip, or up in our wilderness survival. I mean, I knew exactly where the food was, and so I was not going to starve to death. And it takes this level of anxiety that we have in society. That's like, how am I going to like, you know, defend myself? How am I going to provide for my family and all that? And you're like, well, look at that tree right there, dummy. It's food.
Yeah, completely. It's nuts. I mean, the idea of learning how to forage, you know, I think is one of those things. I mean, I'm surprised there's not a movie made about it. It's something I've thought about before. I'm like, you know, why not teach everyone? If you want to take your power back, then, like you said, figure out what all the stress is about. It's not about the dollars. It's about what the dollars gets you. And what do you really need? Shelter and food, right? And if you get sick, you need some people who are good at healing. But that's not something that should be too much of a problem in a civilization that understands how to take care of itself without having to use money. And it's also extremely fun. I mean, like, you know, the idea of when we go into the jungle and you're like walking through the woods and you're eating things as you walk by, and you could do it here in the States too. We were doing the same thing in California a couple weeks ago. Yeah, it's amazing to know that you can eat things that you never thought that you could eat, because we're not taught that. We're taught how to be part of a bigger system, you know, that is dependent, you know, more than self-reliant. And I think that's a big thrill of working in this space that you and I work. You know, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we're pretty blessed. And so, you know, it's like, I don't think anyone listening to this, you know, should walk away with the notion that we're saying, you know, eliminate all currency and, you know, let's all move back to, you know, the Ewok village. But Nick and I have had this really wonderful exposure to cultures that don't live with under the same rules, and they seem to be happier. They seem to be healthier. They seem to be more connected. They have their family structures together. So then how do we juxtapose that gift that these guys have shared with us with the world that we live in, and how do we reconcile that to figure out how we can coexist and move into the future with maybe, you know, the solar panels on our roofs, and, you know, the water, you know, filtration systems that don't waste so much, and, you know, all the things that we can do to bring that here, you know. And that's really the question of the hour, and I'd love to just tease that out with you a little bit, because you've been there, you've been on the ground, and now you're in the city.
You know, it's hard to put a definite, you know, to put a definite solution on that, but I think that it probably starts with clearing your brain, becoming more conscious, and figuring out what makes you happy and what doesn't. I think it's that simple. I mean, people who are in these you know, indigenous communities, they're happy most of the time, or at least they're either happy or they're content. You know, like there's not a lot of stress. So I think that it might be a cool exercise to just throughout your day, throughout your week, just think about the activities that you're participating in, and which ones, regardless of how important you think they are. You know, just don't even try to put that. Don't even try to get your brain involved in that. But just what are you most content doing? You know, and what does it involve? I think a lot of people will find that the things that they're most content doing are things that they probably can make happen more, and they can turn the volume down on the things that don't make them very happy. And I think that for the most part, people like to be doing things in nature. I mean, does anything make you happier than being outside in nature, you know, or being connected in some way, shape, or form with other people? I think community and nature will make us the most happy. I mean, I know that we like to read, we like to work hard and do things like that. But, you know, I think that by just starting to have this barometer of, like, you know, what's making me feel more content as a human being, really, without trying to think about competition, but really just in my core, as a, you know, if I'm really, you know, meditative on this and in a good state of mind, what do I think, you know, is going to make me the happiest right now? I think that that's going to start leading you in the right direction, because I don't think we need to abandon technology. I don't think that we need to abandon a lot of the things that we've done that have gotten us to where we are right now. I think that we just need to become more conscious about what we're doing and what our how the effect and the impact that our actions are having on other people.
Yeah, and the wars that are waged over the resources that go into our tech and all the things that are part of the supply chain. You know, we were just talking offline before we started. I mean, Nick's drinking this wonderful tea he was telling me about. And we're talking about the supply chain that feeds the tea and gets it to him sitting there in Berkeley, California, and how knowing where that comes from and feeling good about, you know, making sure you didn't kill people along the way or, you know, decimate some village to get your tea is an important part of how modern man maintains that stewardship. The modern man, you know, is responsible with their expenditures so that we don't fund the sociopaths who kill our indigenous brethren, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that tea quickly, because I think that that's a cool example.
Sure. Yeah, it's cool. So I'm drinking this tea here. It's Wayusa tea. It's made by Runa, which is a company that my friend Tyler started. And if you watch our film, just a bit about Wayusa, which is the main herb in this. I guess there's a little bit of mint in here too. But if you watch our film, every patient that we brought down, along with their daily herbs, and each patient obviously got different herbs for their particular illness, every patient also got a cup of this Wayusa tea. It's caffeinated about at the same caffeine level as green tea, but it's got 3 times the amount of antioxidants and a bunch of other goodies that green tea doesn't have. And, you know, talking to the different healers about why they use it, they say it makes the other more subtle herbs they prescribed more bioavailable and readily absorbed into the body. So it's kind of interesting. It's one of those many herbs in the jungle that are just now being, you know, studied, and people are starting to actually use them here in the States. So it's cool. It's medicinal, and it's also a nice pick-me-up during the day. So Tyler, who owns a company, like, he's a great example of somebody who's doing it right. You know, he's working with these communities far up the river, and they're growing this in a way that's not hurting anybody. They're doing it. They're growing it in forest gardens. So there's no big tract of land that's being chopped down to kind of make this happen. They're doing it in the forest. It actually grows better that way with big trees around it. So and the people that they're working with are getting a nice chunk of the profit to kind of do things that they need to do to protect their culture. So, you know, everything about the sip you're taking of this is right. I mean, at least as far as we know, as far as everyone knows, you know, it's not having a negative effect. It's actually probably having a positive impact on a culture that's otherwise being marginalized by big business. So I think, like you're saying, things we can do to kind of bridge the gap between our two cultures. That's exactly it. We got to use the brains that we have now to access this stuff while giving back to the communities we're borrowing it from. I think that's sort of the answer.
And I love the fact that your Wayusa tea comes with a story that is woven into the fabric of a culture that is still alive and well. Whereas, I can go to, a Denny's and say, get me a tea, and it's a commodity tea, right? And it has no story. It's just tea. I don't know where the hell it came from. It doesn't matter because I'm tired and I need to wake up. Right, and that's the mark of our civilization. And so the more products that we can support that have a story, that's an authenticated story that helps authentic people and helps make the world a better place, I think that's a really cool place to start and bridge that gap and really offer our humble apologies maybe to our brethren who we've trampled over in our quest for more resources, or I'm tired of my gas prices going up, so someone go mow down a village in the Amazon and go find me more fuel. And that's part of our responsibility, right? Like, my car takes petroleum and I'm a consumer of petroleum and I demand cheap petroleum. Right? And so go get it for me. Doesn't, you don't look at the externalities that are factored in, which is, the village that just got decimated. And so this is a big part of it. I mean, obviously, a couple filmmakers aren't going to come up with all the solutions on a call here, but this is a conversation that I think all of you guys watching need to have with the people in your lives. And this is a conversation that should spread and go viral. Not our conversation, but this conversation, right? About how we can just be better. Right, and that's why you make movies. That's why I make movies and do the things that we do. But making movies isn't the only way to spread message. Do it over dinner.
Yep, for sure. I think that it's about listening too. I mean, I think that we're really good at sort of following a pattern, or the people that have sort of laid out this one track in front of us. But as filmmakers, you and I aren't going out there and telling people, hey, here's what you need to do. We're just literally pointing our cameras at people who have this wisdom and have earned it, and we're listening to their stories, and we're trying to help get these stories out to the masses. And I think that listening in general, like to your own inner intuition, and how you feel about the way that you're behaving from day to day is also a big deal here. I think that we have the ability to do a lot without having to have our hands held by other people, and in terms of what you can do to live more indigenously, I think it starts with your own intuition and doing and learning how to kind of go with your gut and do things that make you feel good, and stay away from things that make you feel a little bit icky inside, or like a little bit less than human. Which is, to me, like you said, going and getting my coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, or cutting somebody off in traffic because I felt like I needed to get to work faster so that I could be at my desk and stare at my emails all day long. I feel like there's a lot of things we got to make. There's a lot of choices to be made, and I think that you can tune into talks like this, and you should. But I think that it really starts with you figuring out to yourself what's making you happiest, and I think it's also a big part of the healing picture.
Love it. Hey, do you think we can get a screener of your delightful movie as part of the success kit for the summit?
Sure.
I would love to share that with people, and so we'll just put something in there so you can email the movie to them and have them see it, and then let's see if we can get some of these wonderfully sourced products into the marketplace and just help people get exposed to stuff that's cool.
Totally.
Because you're out there doing it. I know what you go through. I've been in the Amazon. Those mosquitoes are gnarly.
Man, especially when you're in a malaria zone. That's not fun.
Yeah, you're like every single one that lands on you. You're like, oh man, is this it? Is this the one? Yeah, totally. Yeah,
I'm gonna die.
It's a New York City boy out there in the jungles and the woods of the world, capturing these stories. Man, I take my hat off to you. You're a good dude, and you're fighting the good fight. And I know you got a kid you're doing it for. You got a planet you're doing it for. How can people find you?
You can find us at www. I guess you don't even need to say that anymore, do you?
Totally.
thesacredscience.com. And yeah, we've got a lot of cool things happening, and we'd love for people to come check us out and join our community. Like we're just trying to make a difference, trying to do the right thing, and try to simultaneously give back to the people that really need help from us for the medicine wisdom that they have to offer. So Really excited. And thank you for having me, man. You know, it's always a pleasure talking to you.
Dude, you're one of the best. You're one of the best out there. And so here's a talented filmmaker. He could be making millions of dollars making horror flicks, but he's out there fighting the good fight and capturing real stories from real people. So thank you for doing the right thing, and I look forward to many more of these in the future.
For sure, man. Blessings to you.
Blessings.